So dehumanization is really serious. I mean, the mere fact that we can still relate to each other at all, it's a testimony to the resilience of the human spirit. But in my book, you all read that episode to which a friend of mine knows her very existence, where her parents were Polish, Jewish. They were living in Warsaw. They were members of the underground. Gestapo was tipped off, raided the apartment, found all of this incriminating stuff, was about to take them away. I don't think you can imagine anyone less sympathetic to another human being than the captain of a Gestapo unit having some Jews that he just discovered were part of the underground in Poland. So the situation is as worse as it could be. But just at that moment, they had this 2.5-year-old boy, and he walks over to his Gestapo captain. He doesn't know what's going on. He just sees these shiny brass buttons on his uniform, and he's playing with the buttons. And the captain looks down and sees this. Of course, the parents are absolutely horrified. And he looks up, and he's a completely changed person. And he says, I have a little boy at home just his age, and I miss him very much. And he said, your son has saved your life. And he turned around and walked out, took his man out of the apartment. So this is why I'm saying, I guess it was your question, RB. I'm not sure. I don't think anyone can be so dehumanized that there's no way that they could be reached. In this case, it wasn't precisely the suffering, but the innocence of the little boy that woke him up. But it can be very, very costly, and if you can possibly avoid it, you don't want to let things get that far. Okay. So as we've seen over and over again, the underlying principle in all aspects of nonviolence is that all of us matter, and if you have a system that has to deny that some people matter, it's not going to work. It's not going to take us to a nonviolent future. Who was it? I think it was Bertrand Russell who said, but it was also said by our very own Berkeley science fiction writer, Ursula Le Guin, that if you were told, okay, this would be a really good midterm question, Axiom 64b. If you were told that you could build paradise right here, everything, lattes would be flowing in the street, sufficiency everywhere, but in order to do it, you would have to sacrifice one innocent child. Would you do it? What's your answer to that question? It's, I have to tell you, I have to forewarn you, it's sort of a trick question. Yeah, Matt? That is, okay, so yeah. Yeah. What both of you are saying is very close to the way that I would put it. So let's just put them all together. I mean, Matt and Zoe, I think, were saying that you'd be hurting part of yourself, so what kind of paradise would that be? I would amplify that a little bit and say it's a false question, because you could not possibly build an order of nonviolence on an act of extreme violence. Means and ends are the same. It just does not work that way. And I think we're saying approximately the same thing. But it is very important to be able to examine the assumptions, is the word I was looking for. Examine the assumptions behind the question. And say the very fact that you came up with that question, buddy, shows that you don't know what paradise is. You cannot do this. Artie? That for some reason is entirely different. And I'm not sure why, but it has something to do with the fact that apparently, according to John Milton and other theologians, God, whoever she or he is, wants us to have free will. And infringing the will of another person is very different from using your own in some interesting way. So yeah, Gandhi would be the first to say life is precious, but there's a point at which we're talking about something more than the physical presence of life in this physical body. And I may have to sacrifice it. But you do not want to get into a situation where you say, we have to sacrifice you for this paradise. John? Oh, yes, that's right, the COs. I didn't quite catch that. Yeah, but in the film, The Good War and Those Who Refuse to Fight It, this is what conscientious objectors took on. That, yeah, we would starve ourselves, get ourselves injected with typhoid, you name it, but we would not inflict it on another. That is a qualitatively different act, even though, yes, I feel suffering. But I guess the point is this, that when I'm inflicting it on myself for a higher cause, which I'm not looking to do, don't try to find me one, but if I were to inflict it on myself, as we've seen several times in the course of the semester, the pain turns into something else. We talked about this especially last semester when we saw the film A Time for Justice. We talked about, there was an episode in that film where one of these freedom riders was very, very badly beaten, and he said, you feel the pain, but you don't get bitter. And again, it's that bitterness which is where you're focusing it on yourself and saying, this should not be happening to me. So if it's something you undergo on your own, and you're not a masochist, because there are such critters, but you undergo it for a higher cause, then it somehow, even the physical suffering is different. So it registers differently in your consciousness somehow. Okay, well, this is working exactly the way that I wanted it to work, which is namely we're connecting the framework of retributive/restorative justice to the larger issues of nonviolence. So let's see, where are we here? There's the general characteristics. Oh, I'm sorry. I was about to say that, yeah, we're rooted in the faith proposition, or the frame of reference where every single individual matters and the whole matters, and in a funny way, the whole, even though it's numerically bigger, does not matter more than the individual. And so we reject the whole idea that by sacrificing one individual you can advance society in any serious way. There's one documentary that we're not showing this semester, actually there's several, but one that I really like and would recommend you go out and have a look at sometime. It's called Doing Time, Doing Vipassana. And it's about, you may have seen it in your course, it's about, you might want to add to this, Zoe, but it's about a prison in northern India which was very serious. They had 20,000 people in it. I think it was built for 7,000, something like that. There were murders every day practically. And in charge of this prison, they put a diminutive woman who did very well there. And at one point, she brought in a man named S.N. Goenka, who is the founder of Vipassana meditation, which I think is probably the most popular form of meditation in the world today. Am I wrong? Yeah. What is it that you want me to spell? I can't even spell interpretation. And what is it? Yeah, Vipassana. That I can spell. If it's not English, I can spell it. Yeah, and his name is Goenka. But it's very popular. There's lots of people doing it. It comes, yeah. Doing time, doing Vipassana. Yeah. So this is prisoners. They had prisoners taking a day-long or 2 or 3 day-long Vipassana retreat. And you hear people who are in the habit of going around killing folks, and they have to sit still for most of 48 hours. Yeah. Not in our meditation class. Maybe in her meditation class. No? Okay. Would be a good idea. You have her here? Okay, we'll talk about it later. The point that we're trying to make is, in Indian culture, meditation, whether people do it or not, is felt to be the most honorific thing that a person can do. So to take a prisoner and tell him, we know that you have the capacity to meditate, is like in that culture anyway, the most powerful, effective, rapid way of rehumanizing that person. And so you see these incredible scenes of these guys staggering out of this retreat. Don't ask me to meditate for three days in a row. Staggering out, just pouring down tears and embracing the warden. They're totally changed by this. So this is restoration of a very, very powerful kind. The way I would characterize the movement that's trying to build restorative justice is that it's constructive program almost entirely, and it's a kind of scattered constructive program. It's not pulled into a really tight framework, and so far there's almost no obstructive program in it. There's almost no confrontation. So from my standpoint, what's going to happen in order to make this work is someone or ones, maybe the internet is going to do it for us. No, I don't think so. Someone is going to have to pull this together into one big framework, do a bit of interpretation on it so people know what they're doing, and come up with a strategy, right? Okay, we've been explaining this to you for X amount of months, and now we want you to do it. If you don't, we are going to carry out civil disobedience in some way, shape, or form. There's a tiny little bit of civil disobedience happening here and there. For example, there's an organization, actually I'd like you to know about, called Consistent Life Ethic. What their position is that all forms of inflicting violence on life are wrong. They're all to be avoided. And that has given them a position where, on the one hand, they're against war and the death penalty and stuff like that, and they're also against abortion. It's given them a unique position within the peace movement, the progressive world, whatever you want to call it. Abortion is something that I'd like to talk about with you at some point. But one person who's part of this, a board member and former president of Consistent Life, Mary Ryder, where is this? She and her husband and their 17-year-old daughter were convicted of trespass in January when they went to the contractor's office, contractor Aero, which was a company that made small jets and was leasing them to the CIA to carry out, quote, here's one of those euphemisms again, extraordinary renditions, unquote. In other words, they needed special planes to take people and carry them to countries where they could torture them. And they went with other anti-torture activists, citing, incidentally, a principle in law called necessary defense. Have you heard of that? There is actually a small body of law called peace law, and it protects peace activists. And necessary defense states that if your welfare would be more threatened by not doing what you're doing, you have the right to do it. So you have the right to perform civil disobedience against a law or a system which you have come to understand is going to harm your welfare and that of society in a serious way. So their point was that the rule of law is being destroyed by the practice of torture, and it was in the interest of themselves and the country to perform civil disobedience against it. So similarly, there are some anti-death penalty protests here and there, but mostly it's a question of scattered constructive program. On the other hand, potentially, I think restorative justice is very seditious. It is very destructive to the framework of the present culture, which says, well, I'm going to borrow a term from one of my colleagues here, the concept of, if I'm going to borrow this term, I better remember it. Oh yeah, it is redemptive violence. The idea that you can fix things by violence is so deeply rooted in our culture that the idea that you can fix them without violence, not to mention that you can only fix them without violence, which is my position, is really a paradigm-busting idea. It would just completely break us out of the controlling narratives of our culture. So this movement, even though, okay, it looks a lot tamer than insurrectionary revolution, which we started with, it has the potential of overturning the social order in at least as powerful, I would maybe even say more powerful way. Because we've seen in a lot of these successful insurrectionary movements, they succeeded, but they didn't work. In the sense that they threw out some kind of despotic ruler, but they did not throw out the ideology that brought that ruler to power in the first place. So this potentially is a very deep change that could be worked in our society. And that's why philosophers like, who was it, Foucault, devoted volumes and volumes to the concept of punishment in modern societies. One of the secondary characteristics that I like a lot about the retributive justice movement is that it has been a way of involving some indigenous input. And that, I think, has to be part of the future. We have to realize that, darn it, and I am a PhD in a major research university in the West that's saying this, darn it, the West does not have all the answers. And in some cases, we have to look to other cultures which may be materially and politically less developed than our own, by choice or not by choice, and yet they may have something to offer us. So people are looking in Rwanda, for example, in that part of Africa, they're looking at the Gacaca court system. Am I pronouncing that right? And the way that that works is people are brought in to confront the entire community, which of course is possible to do if the entire community is a village. And through discussion and through the use of respected elders, they acknowledge that they've committed what we would call a crime, some kind of a harmful act against an individual or community, and they work out a retribution. How are we going to fix this? So that's the extremely important assumption behind restorative justice. Just as I have just been saying, no person can be so dehumanized that there would not be a way of rehumanizing them. Sometimes it might be impossibly difficult, but there is a way. Similarly, there's no crime for which some restitution could not be devised. Now let me take an even more exciting, maybe that's the wrong word, moving, dramatic, something like that, practice, again in sub-Saharan Africa. Somewhere in Bemba communities is a practice. Now I have tried to track this down and I have not been able to document it, but that might simply because of what we were talking about earlier today, that people don't have the frame of reference, so they don't notice it when it happens, so they don't write about it. And I even forget where I originally heard about this. So with all of that said, here's this wonderful system that either does or does not happen, but it's very plausible for us. The way it works is, here's this tribe, this village, where somebody has done something very wrong, usually a guy. So what happens is the entire community sits in a circle with that person either in the middle or at the head of the circle. And they go around the circle, and everybody in the community has to what? They have to say something good about that person. And what happens is when they're about a third of the way around the circle, or at some point, the guy, for it is usually a guy, breaks down and he sees his better self and can cling to it and acknowledge his lower self. When that emotional transformation happens, then the whole community can talk about the restitution. Right? Other examples of this are found among the Navajo, which is very, very parallel to, whoops, we're running out of time. I'm going to continue this a little bit on Thursday, but by way of conclusion, I'd like to read you a little bit from a letter that I received from a friend in Florida. I thought of you staying in touch with me whenever you can, and that really counts to me, my friend Michael said, and that was like 7 months ago when I told you I was having trouble with my anger, but now it has gotten so much better, and I have come a long ways with learning how to control my anger, and I no longer feel the pain of anger I once felt, even in the extremely difficult times that I am faced with each day. Every night, you begin to catch on where this friend of mine is. Every night I go to sleep with dudes talking about violence, and I wake up with dudes talking about violence. Everybody wants to be a killer. Nobody wants to be himself. And you are now like family to me because of the insight you share with me about nonviolence has somewhat helped me strive to take my life to another level. My friend is in the most high security prison in Florida for the rest of his life. He'd been in prison for 30 years when he first got hold of my book and started writing to me. Basically his life between the ages of 14 and 18, he had no father in the house, of course. His life between 14 and 18 was basically a crime spree, and he got himself locked away forever. He has serious management problems. I've called the people in the Justice Department in Florida. They said, no, there's no possible way that you'll ever get him out. And not only is he in prison, but he is in a cell by himself 23 hours a day, and he's been there now for 35 years. And yet, so, just ask yourself, what earthly good does this do? Here's a person who has got it. He has caught on. You walk out in the street here and you'll run into quite a few people who understand nonviolence, not as well as Michael McKinney. He totally wants to turn his life around, and there's no way that we can reach out to him and help him do it. So let's talk next time about some of the ways that people are going into prisons, and then we'll move on to environmental and animal rights stuff. And then we'll be talking about